Well, there's important new polling tonight showing that Kamala Harris has expanded her possibilities of winning the Electoral College. And this polling was done before the presidential debate, in which Kamala Harris crushed Donald Trump like no one has ever been crushed in a presidential debate before. So the polling could become even better for Kamala Harris once the effects of the debate register in the next wave of polls. Karl Rove saw this coming 14 years ago. Karl Rove saw this coming long before any other Republican. Karl Rove was the first Washington Republican to fear Kamala Harris. In an op-ed piece for the Wall Street Journal under the headline, "A Catastrophic Debate for Trump," Karl Rove writes, quote, "Tuesday's debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump was a train wreck for him, far worse than anything Team Trump could have imagined." President George W. Bush privately used nicknames for people around him. He called Vice President Dick Cheney Big Time. George W. Bush called his Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill Pablo. The most well-known nickname in the Bush White House was one that George W. Bush didn't come up with and did not like: Bush's brain. That is what everyone else in Washington called Karl Rove, the senior advisor in the Bush White House who masterminded George W. Bush's winning presidential campaigns. Early glowing profiles of Karl Rove during the Bush administration eagerly platformed Karl Rove's theory that he was building a permanent Republican majority in the Congress and a permanent Republican Electoral College hold on the White House. Karl Rove was repeatedly presented in major media profiles as a visionary Republican strategist who was far, far ahead, not just of other Republican strategic thinkers, but all political strategic thinkers in Washington in both parties. Those profiles were the product of the standard groupthink of the Washington press corps, and they all wildly exaggerated Karl Rove's genius. But what was true was that Karl Rove really was thinking about electoral politics for Republicans in a more careful and data-driven way than any other Republicans. It was also true that Karl Rove had a pretty good eye for potential political talent. Karl Rove signed up with George W. Bush in Texas because Rove believed correctly that George W. Bush could go all the way to the White House. And as soon as Karl Rove saw Kamala Harris 14 years ago, in 2010, he was very worried about her.
We are the state that creates leadership for the rest of this country based on our belief that we can be tough and we can be smart, and all the time be dedicated to our history while being empowered to know our destiny.
That was the night in 2010 when San Francisco District Attorney Kamala Harris won the Democratic nomination for Attorney General of the state of California. And that video was not seen anywhere outside of California. Karl Rove saw it. And that is when Karl Rove got scared, because Karl Rove saw the same track to the White House for Kamala Harris that I saw, beginning with her winning her first statewide race as Attorney General in California. That would leave Kamala Harris perfectly positioned, and it did leave her perfectly positioned to run statewide again for a United States Senate, which became possible when Senator Barbara Boxer decided not to run for re-election in 2016. Once in the Senate, Kamala Harris would obviously be a star who everyone would then expect to run for president. The key for Karl Rove was preventing Kamala Harris from winning statewide in the first place, stopping her in that Attorney General campaign. Karl Rove needed to turn Kamala Harris into a loser then, so that she couldn't follow an Obama-like trajectory through the United States Senate to the presidency. It was that obvious to Karl Rove then. And so Karl Rove helped fund a negative advertising campaign against Kamala Harris in 2010. Joining me now from Los Angeles, California's Democratic Attorney General candidate Kamala Harris. Kamala, can you tell the country the story behind that ad that Karl Rove is running against you?
Well, Lawrence, about a week ago, we learned that Karl Rove and Gillespie put together about $1.1 million in money to fund an independent expenditure attack ad against my campaign focused on Los Angeles. We also learned that the expenditure was funded by tobacco, oil, and insurance companies. And as you have mentioned, there's a lot of speculation about why. But what that tells me is that they clearly know that we can win. And they obviously don't like our position on many of the issues that I believe are important, clearly not only to California, but the rest of the country.
Karl Rove was right. They needed to stop Kamala Harris then, or someday Republicans were going to be very worried in a campaign for president against Kamala Harris, as they are worried tonight. Kamala Harris won that first statewide campaign by less than 1% of the vote in California. And that is why she is where she is tonight. She is polling 4 points ahead of Donald Trump in the latest Wisconsin poll. The Marquette University Law School poll, the most trusted poll in Wisconsin, shows that among likely voters, Kamala Harris is polling at 52 in Wisconsin and Donald Trump is polling at 48. That is in a state where the last two presidential elections have been decided by less than 1% of the vote. In 2016, Donald Trump won Wisconsin with 47.2% against Hillary Clinton's 46.5%. And in 2020, Joe Biden won Wisconsin with 49.4% against Donald Trump's 48.8%. That's how close it's supposed to be in Wisconsin. A 4-point gap in the Marquette poll in Wisconsin among likely voters is more than what Democrats could have reasonably hoped for at this point in the campaign. And that polling was completed before Wisconsin watched what Karl Rove saw in that debate, which Karl Rove describes this way. Ms. Harris was often on offense, leaving Mr. Trump visibly rattled as she launched rocket after rocket at him. A New York Times analysis found she spent 46% of her time on the attack, while Mr. Trump devoted 29% of his time to going after her. Debates aren't won on defense. Ms. Harris pressed Mr. Trump on the economy, the Ukraine war, foreign policy, health care, the January 6th attack, and especially abortion, leaving him flustered and often incoherent. Mr. Trump had to know the vice president would try to get him to lose his cool. She did. She went after him on his multiple indictments. She called him weak and belittled him as a 6-time bankrupt, spoiled inheritor of wealth. She said his former national security advisor thought him, in her words, dangerous and unfit for the Oval Office. He took the bait almost every time she put it on the hook. Rather than dismissing her attacks and launching his strongest counter-arguments against her, Mr. Trump got furious. As her attacks continued, his voice rose. He gripped the podium more often and more firmly. He grimaced and shook his head, at times responding with wild, fanciful rhetoric. Mr. Trump offered angry responses, pursed his lips and eyes darting mostly down, seldom looking at her. And what was it with his makeup that left white circles around his eyes? Professional Republicans take Karl Rove very, very seriously. Big money Republican donors have always taken guidance from Karl Rove very, very seriously. They believe that Karl Rove really was Bush's brain, especially in campaigns. And so Republicans reading Karl Rove's assessment of the debate in the Wall Street Journal is as depressing as watching the debate was for those Republicans. Karl Rove continued, "It matters how debating candidates carry themselves. There, it was no contest. Ms. Harris came across as calm, confident, strong, and focused on the future. Mr. Trump came across as hot, angry, and fixated on the past, especially his own. She mastered the split screen, projecting confidence and wordlessly undercutting him by smiling while shaking her head as he spoke. Many undecided and swing voters will make up their minds less on any single issue than on their visceral reactions to the candidates. Ms. Harris did herself much good with that crowd Tuesday. Mr. Trump didn't. Even voters Even voters wanted to learn something new and reassuring about the candidates in the debate. She provided them plenty while he didn't. There's no putting lipstick on this pig. Mr. Trump was crushed by a woman he previously dismissed as dumb as a rock, which raises the question, what does that make him? The answer to that question was provided by Kamala Harris in the debate.
I have talked with military leaders, some of whom worked with you, and they say you're a disgrace.
You know who won a debate when one candidate uses the debate in a campaign commercial and the other doesn't.
I want to turn to the issue of abortion.
For 52 years, they've been trying to get Roe v. Wade into the states. I did a great service in doing it. It took courage to do it. And the Supreme Court had great courage in doing it.
I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. They don't want that. I think the American people believe that certain freedoms, in particular the freedom to make decisions about one's own body, should not be made by the government.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Here is what debate winners say.
So North Carolina, 2 nights ago, Donald Trump and I had our debate. You watched it? Did you watch it? And look, I believe we owe it to have another debate. Right? We owe it to the voters.
Another debate. And here is what debate losers say. There will be no third debate. So says Donald Trump. Vice President Harris went to North Carolina today, where she has opened up the new possibility for Democrats to win the Electoral College with North Carolina's 16 electoral votes. The Democratic presidential candidate has not won North Carolina since 2008, when Barack Obama did it in his first presidential campaign. Donald Trump has won North Carolina twice now. If Donald Trump loses North Carolina this time, that would virtually eliminate any Trump chance of winning the Electoral College. With recent polls in North Carolina showing a 3-point gap between the candidates, the most recent poll shows Kamala Harris at 50 and Donald Trump at 47. If that's what happens on Election Day in North Carolina, Kamala Harris will be president. Here is North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper speaking to NBC's Nnamdi Egwuonu tonight after Vice President Harris's campaign event.
There's a reason why Donald Trump spent more money in August in North Carolina than any other state, because they're panicking. They know that Kamala Harris is at least tied or maybe even taking the lead in North Carolina. Donald Trump has no other path to the presidency. He must win North Carolina. We know that if Kamala Harris wins North Carolina, she is the next president of the United States. We did this in 2008. North Carolina voted for Barack Obama and made history. North Carolina is ready to make history again.
Here's Vice President Harris in Greensboro, North Carolina, earlier this evening.
Donald Trump intends to end the Affordable Care Act. Now think about that. Think about that. We remember what it meant when insurance companies could deny you for a pre-existing condition. Remember what that was? So he wants to get rid of it. And as he said in the debate, he made clear he has no plan to replace it. In fact, you remember? Concept. You remember? He has, quote, concepts of a plan. Concepts of a plan. I mean, we're 54 days from this election. Concepts of a plan. which means no actual plan. Which means no actual plan. And 45 million Americans are insured through the Affordable Care Act. So understand what that means. He's going to end it based on a concept and take us back. So generations of Americans before us led the fight for freedom, and now the baton is in our hands. The baton is now in our hands. And we who believe then in the sacred freedom to vote will finally pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. And we who believe in the freedom to live safe from gun violence will finally pass an assault weapons ban, universal background checks, and red flag laws. So much is on the line in this election. And we got this. We got this. But look, here's the thing. This is not 2016 or 2020. The stakes are even higher. And let us be very clear. Someone who suggests that we should terminate the Constitution of the United States should never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. Never again. Never again. Never. And put that all in the context of people who have been talking about how he was when they served with him in the White House. People who saw him every day. His national security advisor, his defense secretary, his chief of staff, and his vice president. All of whom have warned America Donald Trump is not fit to be president of the United States. And should never occupy our nation's highest office again. We know ours will be a very tight race until the very end. We are the underdog. Let's be clear about that. We are the underdog. And so we have hard work ahead of us, but we like hard work. Hard work is good work. Hard work is good work. And with your help, we will win. We will win. And so I ask you today, North Carolina, are you ready to make your voices heard? Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we ready to fight for it? And when we fight, we win. There you go. God bless you, and God bless America.
Leading off our discussion tonight, Anderson Clayton, chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Big day for the campaign in your state today. That was a giant crowd for Greensboro. 17,000, I think, is the estimate. So is that the debate effect that we saw in that crowd, or did you get a little extra turnout today because of the Taylor Swift effect?
That's the Kamala Harris effect is what we're calling it. It's because folks in our state all across it are are so excited. We had over 100 students alone from UNC Chapel Hill's campus today come and meet her in Greensboro. And then also we had our other rally in Charlotte today, too, where we had students from UNC Charlotte come out to that. And so it's just been really exciting to see the momentum that she's garnered from especially young people across the state of North Carolina.
We're going to be watching polls closing in North Carolina on election night. That's, East Coast time. That could be, if that's an early enough call, you could eliminate a lot of suspense with a Kamala Harris victory in North Carolina.
We could, and to Kamala Harris's point, as she said it on stage, we need every single person across our state getting out to support us and making sure that you're knocking on doors with us in your communities this weekend. We've got folks that are out there every single weekend making sure that we are garnering that margin that we lost by in 2020. North Carolina was, the one state that came within a 1% margin for President Biden is 74,000 votes. It's about 42 votes per every precinct in every county in North Carolina, and we're chasing after them.
We heard what the governor had to say about obviously winning North Carolina. I mean, she will absolutely win this, win the Electoral College. This is going to be very intense, and it becomes an interesting challenge for the campaign about resources. If they have to devote resources to North Carolina because they're competitive, that spreads out where the campaign has to be. How do you expect the campaign to be able to cover this expanded possibility of Electoral College possibilities in these states?
We've had a historic wave of donations and people that are supporting the vice president at the top of the ticket this year. And so I think that it's exciting to see the investment that they've already made in the state in terms of the 100+ organizers that we have across North Carolina right now. We also have 30+ organizers working full time on campus organizing, turning out the youth vote. That's what helped win North Carolina in 2008 with our coordinated campaign here. And so really just not leaving any voter on the table or taken for granted in this state. So if anyone is willing to join us this weekend, ncdp.org is where you'll go to find out more information about registering voters and getting out with us on campuses, but also across our communities in our state.
Anderson Clayton, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and please keep us up to date on North Carolina.
Thank you.
Thank you. And coming up, the man who pulls off the miracle in Ohio that no one else can. Senator Sherrod Brown will join us next.
Republicans can't claim to be pro-family, only to block protections for IVF. The American people deserve another chance to see if Republicans are for access to IVF or against it. It's that simple. So next week, Mr. President, the Senate will vote once again to take up the very same bill we voted on earlier this summer, establishing a nationwide right to IVF and making it easier for people to access this critical treatment. Our bill should have passed in June, and it is more than good enough to pass now.
In June, 47 Senate Republicans successfully voted to block the Right to IVF Act from even being debated in the United States Senate. Senator Schumer is bringing that bill back up for a vote after Donald Trump tried to falsely portray himself as a protector of IVF procedures in this week's debate. In Ohio, the Trump-endorsed Republican candidate for Senate, Bernie Moreno, is trying to overturn the will of Ohio voters who voted to amend their state's constitution to include the protections of Roe versus Wade. In a recording obtained by USA Today, Bernie Moreno at a July campaign event said, "We lost issue 1 last year because only 52% of evangelical Christians bothered to show up at the ballot box. What did we get in exchange? We have abortion right until birth. We have no parental consent for minors getting an abortion because we didn't show up to vote. Can't do that. They can only cheat so much." The lies in that statement include voting is not cheating. It is not legal for a minor in Ohio to obtain an abortion without parental consent, and abortion is not legal until birth. Ohio's Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown, who is running for re-election against Bernie Moreno, released this ad.
In Ohio, we were clear.
An overwhelming victory for reproductive rights.
But Bernie Moreno thinks he knows better than us.
Because even though we voted to protect abortion rights,
Bernie Moreno says he'd vote for a national abortion ban.
He's against abortion, even in cases of rape or incest.
Absolute pro-life, no exceptions.
My position is crystal clear, has not changed on abortion.
It's clear Bernie Moreno doesn't care what we think. What's clear to me is that Bernie Moreno doesn't respect us.
I'm sure Brown and I approve this message.
Joining us now is Ohio's senior senator, Sherrod Brown. He is the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee and a member of the Senate Finance Committee. Senator, thank you very much for joining us. Great to have you here in the studio.
It's wonderful.
We never get you here because you're always in Ohio. I just am kind of amazed that a politician running statewide in any state would see his electorate overwhelmingly vote for something in a ballot initiative and then run against that while trying to win statewide.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie Moreno thinks he knows better. 57% said, in Ohio emphatically said that these decisions should be made by women, their doctors, not by politicians. Bernie Moreno, there's an arrogance to that even, they really tried to rig the election. Bernie Moreno put $100,000 of his own money. He's spending millions against me, but $100,000 of his own money in passing that. He's not willing to accept it. They're spending a lot of money to get that message. I ask people that care about abortion rights to come to SherrodBrown.com, kick in $15, $20. We're a lot of money being spent against us. We're going to win in part because we'll make that contrast. I'm for abortion rights. Bernie Moreno doesn't respect. He thinks he knows better.
So you could reasonably think when you were going to vote in Ohio and voting to preserve this right for women that when you won, huge win, that you Ohio voters had settled it. It's done. But then we see in a presidential debate that Donald Trump refuses to say what he would do if a Republican Senate with, say, Senator Bernie Moreno sent a national bill banning abortion. Would Donald Trump sign it? If he did, that would override what the Ohio voters have done.
Yeah, and there's no question Bernie Moreno. I mean, look at those. There's plenty of other cases where he said 100% pro-life. I mean, abortion ban, no exceptions. And he would vote for that clearly. So would a number of others running in for office around the state, Tester's opponent and others. And that's going to be a big, I've said on the show before, I don't see politics as left or right. I see whose side are you on. And clearly I'm on the side that women should be making these decisions, not a bunch of politicians like Moreno.
Vice President Harris was very clear on this issue in the presidential debate. If a Democratic-controlled Senate can send her, along with a Democratic-controlled House, a federal law reinstating Roe versus Wade, she would absolutely sign that.
Yeah, I believe her. I know her. I've worked with her. I know my colleagues feel the same. And any chance we get, we will pass. In Ohio, it was a wonderful election night when we saw, I won 16 counties in 2018. We saw those 16 and 9 more counties voting for abortion rights. It is the majority in perhaps every state. Kansas, it's going to be in Montana, probably in Florida, certainly in Ohio, and the voters have spoken loudly and clearly.
When you went into this campaign, did you expect abortion to be as big an issue in the campaign? I mean, some observers might think, well, the Ohio voters settled it.
Ohio voters, some people said we should wait till next year. I'm glad we didn't because women got those rights 1 year earlier in Ohio. Mm-hmm. But it's still going to be front and center. When you've got a guy that wants to take away those rights, that the voters in Ohio that thinks he knows better, that doesn't respect, as that ad said, doesn't respect women, doesn't respect the will of the voters, then I think it's pretty clear that will be a voting issue next year. And I think it'll be a voting issue until we pass something comparable to Roe v. Wade in the U.S. Congress.
Senator Sherrod Brown, thank you very much for joining us again tonight. Always appreciate it. Thank you. And up next, Florida is now in play for the Democrats in the Senate campaign, where the campaign there is now actually a tie within the margin of error of the polling. Democratic Senate candidate Debbie Mucarsel-Powell will join us next. In order to maintain control of the United States Senate, Democrats have to win all of their re-election campaigns, including in difficult states for Democrats like Montana, where John Tester is running for re-election. One of the states that Democrats are trying to add to their winning list is Florida. Winning Florida could insulate Democrats from the possibility of losing in any of the re-election campaigns. Abortion is on the ballot in Florida, potentially driving up voter turnout in support of a popular amendment that would add reproductive rights to the state's constitution and permanently undo the abortion ban in Florida, signed into law by Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. After watching Vice President Harris crush Donald Trump on the debate stage on Tuesday, especially on the subject of abortion, Florida Republican Senator Rick Scott seems afraid to debate his Democratic opponent, our next guest, Debbie Mucarsel-Powell.
Are you going to debate your opponent in Florida?
I'm watching to see if she's going to start traveling the state. She spends all her time in Miami. I'm continuing to travel the state.
There have been some polls that show that race pretty close. Do you think it's a close race at this point?
I'm going to work my butt off and win.
But it sounds like you're not committing to debating her.
We'll see what happens.
Rick Scott, who will be running to be the Republican majority leader in the Senate next year if he wins, and the Republicans win the Senate, is in trouble for an incumbent in the latest Florida Atlantic University poll, which shows a tie within the margin of error, with Rick Scott running at 47% with likely voters and Debbie Mucarsel-Powell running at 43%. The margin of error in the poll is 3%, which means that either of those numbers could be 3 points higher or 3 points lower. Rick Scott could be as low as 44. Debbie Mucarsel-Powell could actually be running as high as 46. So that is a tie within the margin of error. And when an incumbent is polling below 50, that incumbent is in trouble because historically, more of the undecideds tend to break for the new candidate. Debbie Mucarsel-Powell's campaign released this new ad.
I grew up under a dictatorship before coming to the U.S. I'm Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, and for me, freedom isn't some political slogan. It's why I came to America. But Rick Scott is trying to take away your freedoms right now. For women, banning abortion. For families, raising taxes. And for seniors, ending Social Security and the freedom to retire with dignity. If you care about freedom, elect a senator who actually believes in it. That's why I approve this message.
Joining us now is former Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell of Florida. She is running for U.S. Senate in Florida against incumbent Rick Scott. I have to say, his answer to why he's not debating you was something I couldn't quite follow. He says he's not debating you because of where you are.
Good evening, Lawrence. Look, an old and tired and corrupt politician being scared to debate a strong woman, a qualified woman with a clear vision to build a better state. Does it sound familiar? We now accepted 3 debates. He has been dodging the question. He is obviously petrified because if I were him, I would be too. He can't defend his record on writing a plan that was actually a preamble for Project 2025 to end Social Security and Medicare. He has a record of pushing for a national abortion ban. He voted against access to IVF. And in Florida, our values are not those. We know that the poll to support Amendment 4 now is over 60%. We have seen mobilizing like we haven't seen in years in the state, millions of dollars coming in to get those voters to come out and vote in support of Amendment 4. I just need 50+1, but I can't do this alone, Lawrence. I need everyone to pay attention. We have a unique opportunity in Florida to win and keep the Senate majority. Go to debbieforflorida.com. Help me put this out on air all over the markets in Florida. We can do it.
I know Washington Democrats in the Senate are very much looking at the possibility of you picking up Florida as something that could really help them. And Senator Scott has said, quote, I'm voting against the referendum, meaning he is voting against what 60% of Florida is likely to vote for to preserve women's reproductive freedom in Florida.
He has been attacking women's rights here in the state of Florida since he was governor. When he was governor, he passed a law that forces women to undergo a 24-hour waiting period and an ultrasound when they've already made a decision that they have to terminate a pregnancy. This is a man that could care less about what happens to a woman's life when she's sent home to have a miscarriage, go into sepsis, lose half of her blood. This is a story that we just heard here in our state and almost die. He has been speaking to young women and spreading disinformation that Democrats support crushing a baby's skull. It's extremely disturbing. It's borderline abusive of the young women that are hearing this from this man. And that's why, as a mom, I can tell you my conviction of protecting our rights here in the state, our rights across the country, because Vice President Kamala Harris will not be able to codify Roe v. Wade if she doesn't have the votes. And I intend to be the 51st vote.
You've got an awful lot of Social Security beneficiaries, Medicare beneficiaries in Florida who are concerned about the future of those programs. Republicans have repeatedly gone after those programs as their first target in spending cuts. Democrats always trying to protect them. What are you telling voters about what's at stake in Social Security and Medicare?
Lawrence, I was just at a senior center actually today, and I was speaking to this woman, this Latina woman in her late 60s, and she's right now having this fight with the Social Security office. They want to cut her benefits. She's extremely concerned, and she's actually a Republican here in Miami, and she is supporting me because she is very well aware that Rick Scott wrote this plan. She knows that they want to eliminate and cut Social Security. Donald Trump has also been very clear about that. And so I think this is an issue that will connect with seniors across the state, regardless of political affiliation. And that is something that we've been doing. We have been bringing in Democrats, independents, Republicans, because we're talking about the issues that matter most. And that is why I know that we are ready to flip this state.
Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, thank you very much for joining our discussion tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
And up next, when the FBI seizes your phone, you've got big problems. The FBI has now seized the phone of New York City's mayor, other New York City officials, including the New York City police commissioner, who was forced to resign today. What's going on in New York City now will be the stuff of movie drama in the future. That's next. It was the stuff of movie drama today at New York Police Department headquarters when the police commissioner, Edward Caban, resigned while under investigation by the FBI. The last New York City police commissioner investigated by the FBI was Rudolph Giuliani's police commissioner, Bernard Kerik, who was convicted of federal crimes and served prison time before being pardoned by Donald Trump. New York City Mayor Eric Adams is also under investigation by the FBI. The FBI seized the police commissioner's cell phone last week. The FBI seized the mayor's cell phone 10 months ago. Mayor Adams spoke at a press briefing today that was covered live on all New York City local television stations. The mayor took no questions.
A short time ago, I accepted the resignation of the NYPD Commissioner, Edward Caban. He concluded that this is the best decision at this time. I respect his decision, and I wish him well. Commissioner Caban dedicated his life to making our city safer, and we saw a drop in crime for 13 of the 14 months he served as commissioner. To ensure crime keeps going down in our city today, I'm taking immediate action in appointing Tom Donlin as interim police commissioner. Tom is an experienced law enforcement professional who has worked at the local, state, federal, and international levels. He served as New York's director of the Office of Homeland Security, ran the FBI's National Threat Center and the FBI NYPD Joint Terrorist Task Force, and worked as the cold case agent investigating the 1993 Twin Towers bombing, as well as the attacks in U.S. embassies in Africa and the USS Cole in Yemen by Al-Qaeda. He is also a Bronx native. Tom joins a team at One Police Plaza that is relentlessly dedicated to public safety and protecting New Yorkers.
The new police commissioner, Tom Donlin, will need a spreadsheet to keep track of the number of officials appointed by Mayor Eric Adams who are currently under investigation. At the same time, former police commissioner Caban's phone was seized by the FBI. The FBI searched the homes and seized the phones of First Deputy Mayor Sheena Wright, New York City Schools Chancellor David Banks, who is Sheena Wright's fiance, and David Banks' brother, Deputy Mayor Philip Banks, who retired as a senior officer in the NYPD in 2014 under a cloud of suspicion about free trips that he had accepted. Also surrendering his phone to the FBI was a third Banks brother, Terrence Banks, who previously worked in the city's public transportation agency. All of that was just last week. Last November, the FBI approached the mayor himself and took 2 of his cell phones, reportedly in connection with the FBI investigation into whether the Adams campaign coordinated with Turkish groups to funnel illegal campaign contributions. The FBI at the time also searched the Brooklyn home of Mayor Adams' chief fundraiser, Brianna Suggs, and Rana Abbasova, his former liaison to the Turkish community. In February, the FBI searched multiple homes related to the mayor's director of Asian Affairs, Winnie Greco. That investigation reportedly relates to a separate investigation into Mayor Adams' travel and ties to China. Federal prosecutors have not yet criminally charged any of those people. But in state court, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg has charged several of Mayor Adams' allies. District Attorney Bragg obtained guilty pleas against 3 people for funneling campaign contributions to Mayor Adams through straw donors and indicted the mayor's former buildings commissioner, Eric Ulrich, for allegedly taking bribes. Mayor Adams is up for re-election next year. Incumbent Democratic mayors in New York City are usually not vulnerable to a primary challenge, but Mayor Adams, who in his last election emerged from a large field of Democratic primary candidates, which included former federal prosecutor Maya Wiley, already has one primary challenger, New York State Comptroller Brad Lander. But when the FBI seizes your cell phones, re-election is the least of your worries. We'll be right back.